I witnessed something late at night on the 4th of July that I feel I need to share. To give you some context, I'm a bit of a weirdo, and I spend a lot of my time hiking. I've been dealing with some serious emotional and mental distress lately, caused by things outside of my control. My way of coping and finding comfort is by going out for late night hikes. Turns out, that decision paid off when I went out to the countryside late that night to enjoy the view of the full moon and the fireflies in the woods. I parked my car at a hidden spot next to the river, surrounded by dense forest and a lot of swamps. I set out on foot around maybe 11:30 p.m. I may or may not have had a few White Claws stashed in my backpack, but that's not important. After walking for about 2.5 hours, mostly without incident, I decided it was time to head back and find my car. That's when things went from relatively normal to, oh my god, what have I stumbled upon? As I crossed the bridge to get to my car, which was still about 3 miles west of where I was, I heard footsteps on the road behind me. My mood quickly shifted to fight or flight as I turned around and saw a man dressed in all black, much closer to me than I expected. We made eye contact and, suddenly, this guy started sprinting in my direction. But he swerved around me at the last moment. Maybe it was the liquid courage or just pure adrenaline, but I decided to yell out to him, "Hey man, everything okay?" He replied,
"Yeah, everything's fine. I gotta go get my wife."
I thought to myself it was kinda weird considering that it's 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. But I let it go and continued walking to my car. Some time had passed, and as I was getting closer to my car, I suddenly heard a scream from out in the woods. It sounded like a woman crying out for help, and honestly, it sent shivers down my spine. I stopped and listened to what she was saying, and amidst her sobs, the most I could make out was what sounded like pleads for her life. At that moment, my stomach turned. Now, her screams seemed to be coming from the same direction that I was heading, so I was a bit apprehensive about taking the path back to my car now. I decided to head into the bushes on the side of the path and quietly make my way to my car. Not long after this, I saw the same man who ran past me earlier, along with another, much larger man, both dressed in black. They were walking towards me, and the bigger guy had a woman slung over his shoulders. She had stopped screaming, but she appeared to still be crying and completely incoherent. She looked young, maybe in her teens or early 20s. She had blonde hair and she was really petite. I decided to emerge from the side of the path and I said to the man, "Is that your wife? Is everything okay?" He replied,
"Yeah, she's fine. She, just can't handle her liquor."
As he said this, they both continued walking past me. The woman was clearly not drunk, but appeared to be drugged. She was trying to speak, but her words were slurred, and she couldn't even lift her arms or head to free herself from the guy. It looked like she was struggling to form coherent words as she said something to me along the lines of, "Please no, help." She desperately tried to look at me, reaching her arms out, but she looked so weak from whatever they had done to her. It was at this point I could tell something was seriously wrong, something beyond just alcohol. Just 15 minutes ago, I heard her screaming clear words, and now she seemed barely conscious. I always carry pepper spray and razor blades when I hike, but I knew there was no way I could take on these two guys in some reckless attempt to save her. I'm only 5'6" and 140 pounds. No match for them. The woman tried to cry and plead more with me as they walked away, and honestly, I was mortified. When they were about 20 feet behind me, I took a glance over my shoulder to make sure they weren't harming her, because her slurred cries were honestly gut-wrenching. I saw that they had stopped on the road and were looking back at me. I pretended like I didn't notice them and I kept walking. Eventually they turned back around and walked away. I decided to call 911 immediately after this. I described to the dispatcher what I had witnessed and my belief that the woman was being taken against her will and that she was possibly drugged. The officer responded that they had a few calls earlier that night, so they're going to send someone out. No, I was only a mile away from my car, but I was just so disturbed by what I had seen that I don't think I would have forgiven myself if I didn't go back after those two. I ultimately decided to run to my car and track those two men down. No, I know I didn't personally know this woman, but I drove as fast as I could to the spot where I last saw them. Obviously, they weren't still there, so I kept going along the road, and eventually I saw multiple police cars at the scene up ahead. I drove closer just to be sure that they had found the right guys, and they had. The men had been thrown against their cruisers with their hands up, being frisked. Paramedics had shown up, and the poor woman was lying on the ground as they worked to place her on a stretcher and get her to a hospital. The sense of relief I felt was honestly indescribable. Probably not even a fraction of the relief this woman felt when the police finally intervened. The dispatcher called me back and informed me that they didn't send officers earlier in the night because the situation was described as a noise disturbance. Given that it was a holiday weekend, that explanation didn't raise any red flags, so I can't entirely blame them for not arriving sooner. Needless to say, I didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night. I went home and cried all day, overwhelmed by what I had saw. To this day, I still think to myself, what if I hadn't taken that walk? What if no one had called for help? What if they grabbed me too? Let me conclude with this. If you see something, don't be a bystander. In July of 2019, I was leaving a coworker/friend's 4th of July party with my husband and our 9-year-old daughter. It was around 10:45 p.m., and we were in a town about 45 minutes away from home, navigating through an unfamiliar country road. The town we were in tended to quiet down early, so the roads were mostly deserted, with only a few cars passing by occasionally. There were no cars in front of us or behind us when, suddenly, a very dark vehicle, possibly hunter green or dark gray, pulled up closely behind our car. I don't typically exceed the speed limit by more than 5 to 6 miles per hour, so being tailgated wasn't entirely unusual. The longest stretch of the 2-lane road before reaching the highway was a winding, tree-lined section. It had a significant curve, almost like a hairpin turn, but not as sharp. From the moment we entered that part of the road, we could see almost a mile ahead until we exited it. There were no turnoffs, shoulders, or places to stop, just the road surrounded by trees. As we approached the curve, the car behind us continued to tailgate without flashing lights, weaving, or honking. It stayed right on our tail the whole time. Then, out of nowhere, I glanced in the rearview mirror and realized that the headlights of the car had been tailgating us. Then, out of nowhere, I glanced in the rearview mirror and realized that the headlights of the car that had been tailgating us were gone. I didn't see any parking or marker lights, nor did I see any taillights. I looked back as far as I could and couldn't spot the car anywhere. I mentioned this to my husband, and he also started scanning the area behind us, but couldn't locate them. They had simply vanished. Remember, there was no place for them to stop, turn around, or exit the road. I quickly refocused on the directions from my GPS and forgot about the strange car. About half a mile after the curve, we reached a stop sign where I needed to make a left turn onto the road leading to the highway and closer to civilization. There were no cars approaching from either direction as we came to a stop. Just as I was about to accelerate and make the left turn, I heard a knock near my back driver's side window. I checked my side view mirror, but saw nothing. Then, I heard another knocking sound. This time, closer to the metal of the car and not quite on the window. My husband turned to look back, and I asked my daughter if he saw anything, but neither of them did. So, I shrugged it off, thinking we were just hearing things, and proceeded to make the left turn. As I completed the turn, I glanced back at the entrance of the road one more time, and there were a pair of headlights illuminating the area where our car had just been. Two individuals, who were too far away to make out details, were returning to the dark-colored vehicle I had seen before. I can't say for certain, but I strongly believe that had I opened my window or door to investigate the source of the knocking, something terrible would have happened to my family that night. Just last week, I had an encounter that left me feeling incredibly unsettled. It happened when I decided to make a trip to Walmart to pick up a few items for a 4th of July bonfire. However, even before leaving my house, I had a strange feeling that maybe I shouldn't go. I dismissed it as my anxiety acting up and proceeded with my plans. Inside the store, I quickly gathered almost everything I needed and went towards the front of the store to check out the gift cards. While I was browsing, I noticed a man who seemed to be doing the same. Initially, I didn't think much of it. I moved closer to where he was, searching for a gift card, and briefly made eye contact with him. He smiled and greeted me. Being from Iowa, where people are generally friendly, I returned the smile and said hi. Then I continued my search. However, I soon became aware that the man wasn't moving from his spot and was still watching me intently. He proceeded to ask me a very peculiar question.
Hey, do you know where I can find an actual Walmart gift card, like those?
This raised major red flags for me. This man was young, like in his mid-20s, and didn't appear to be elderly or disabled. His disheveled hair and overall unkempt appearance gave me a sense of unease. Considering it was only 8:30 in the morning, it seemed unlikely that he had just finished a construction job or something of the sort. Strangely, he seemed somewhat familiar, but I couldn't recall where I might have seen him before. I pointed him in the general direction of the gift cards without offering to show him personally. Hastily, I grabbed the cards I needed and made my way to the self-checkout area. I kept a close eye on the man, and to my alarm, he went to the section I had pointed out and continued observing my actions as I scanned my bag items. At this point, I realized he was watching my every move. In an attempt to let him know that I was aware of his presence, I turned around and made direct eye contact with him. His gaze was chilling, and I could sense a malevolence in his eyes that sent shivers down my spine. It was the kind of look that predators give their prey before launching an attack. It really creeped me out. Admittedly, the next decision I made wasn't the smartest one. Instead of immediately contacting the police, I wanted to find someone I could call and have them on the line as I walked to my car. I thought that if I were engaged in a phone conversation, the chances of the man trying to harm or harass me would be reduced. So, I dialed the only available person at the moment, my grandma. I made sure she was on the phone with me before grabbing my bags to leave the register. As I began walking out, the man followed closely behind me, almost matching my every step. While we walked side by side, I loudly discussed the metal skewers I had purchased for roasting hot dogs and making s'mores. I did this intentionally as a signal to him that I was prepared to defend myself if necessary. He glanced at the metal skewers out of the corner of his eye when I mentioned them. Eventually, he angrily retreated to his car, which was parked just a lane away from mine, across from it. I wasted no time and quickly got in my car. I immediately read his license plate number to my grandma over the phone. I couldn't discern or make out the model of his car, only that it was some kind of gold coloring. He sat in his car, watching me intently for a few minutes. It was evident that he was waiting to see if I would leave first so he could tail me. Eventually, he did pull out of the parking spot, but in an excruciatingly slow manner. I avoided looking at him directly, fearing any grotesque gestures he might make. Instead, I focused on the wheels of his car as they passed me. It felt like his intention was to let me know that he was still observing me. I continued to keep a close eye on him as he left the parking lot and turned onto the main road that I would typically use to go home. However, this time, I chose a different route, opting for back roads to ensure I wasn't being followed. I even drove into a housing area and parked for a few minutes, observing if the man would show up before I finally proceeded to go home. Luckily, he never appeared, and I arrived home safely. But honestly, the encounter left me feeling sick to my stomach, nor had I felt such terror for my life. In the past, I have had men follow me, but I was always accompanied by someone. This time, I was alone. If I could go back, I would have immediately called 911 and informed them that I was being followed. I'm not sure if it's too late to call them now and provide them with his license plate number or something, but I plan to contact them tomorrow to see if there's anything they can do. Since the incident, I have been plagued by this constant sense of paranoia, fearing that this man may have followed me home or that he knows where I live. I hope that reaching out to the police will help ease my worries. My police officer friend never mentioned any time restrictions on reporting incidents or providing information. He assured me that calling and sharing details could potentially aid the police in their investigations. This man might be wanted for other offenses, or there may be records of similar incidents involving him. He also explained that, unfortunately, some individuals derive satisfaction from instilling fear in women, viewing it as some kind of power trip. I can't shake this unsettling feeling that I might encounter this man again. I've been told numerous times that I have a strong intuition, and I wish I'd listened to it that day and waited for my husband to accompany me to the store. If, by chance, I do come across this man in the future, I now know what steps to take. However, I sincerely hope that I never do have to cross paths with him again. I live in a small rural community in the eastern United States. It's a nice little town. Because of my work in the medical field, I've met some interesting folks. I'm also familiar with law enforcement and emergency personnel. Small town life isn't as dull and uneventful as people think, especially since everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. I have a lot of stories to share, but since this one just happened, I'll start here. Because it's still very recent and the investigation is ongoing, I have to be vague with some details, but I needed to tell someone. A little background on me. I'm single and live alone. Due to a stalker, I've had to move twice in the past, but that's a story for another time. However, it is relevant to this story for multiple reasons. The first of which being that I have a dog for the sake of protection, as well as motion sensors and outdoor security cameras. The second reason being the location of my home, which is literally down the street from the fire department. It's also a couple blocks from the police station. However, next to the fire department is the road department, which is basically a parking lot where they park their road equipment and empty garbage trucks at night and on the weekends. Oddly enough, it doesn't have a security camera. Small town life, I suppose. My house sits on a hill with a good view of that side street. Due to the incline, the large trees in the front yard, and the half cornfield on the property next to me, most people on the street below wouldn't notice me in the backyard unless they were actively looking. However, I can see the street clearly. This incident happened Saturday evening. The county was holding its annual Independence Day spiel with a community barbecue, music, fireworks, and the likes. I didn't attend because it's just not my thing. Plus, I have a dog, and the sound of fireworks can be traumatizing for him. Before the big show, I took the dog out to relieve herself in the backyard. There was still at least an hour of daylight, but the entire neighborhood was pretty quiet because most everyone was at the fairgrounds or various other holiday events. So, when an unfamiliar, large white pickup truck slowly drove down the street, I noticed. It must have turned around at the end of the street because I saw it again, moving in the opposite direction, only about 20 seconds later. This time, it turned into the parking lot of the road department. Now, people in the town have been known to toss things into the empty garbage trucks because they don't want to or are unable to make the trip to the landfill themselves. Usually it's things like furniture or broken equipment, but I didn't see any of those things in the back of this truck. The driver was a stocky guy of average height. He took 3 large black trash bags from the bed of his truck and tossed them into the garbage truck. Then he left. Now, I swear I'm not one of those meddling rear window types who always thinks activity is suspicious and that their neighbors are up to no good. But something about this just didn't sit right with me. Normally, when I see people tossing their garbage into the trucks and leaving, I don't bother reporting it because it's relatively harmless. But this time, I had a gut feeling. So, I decided to call the police. If anything, they could get the guy for illegally dumping trash from a barbecue or whatever. While I'm on the phone with dispatch, I put my dog inside to cut down on distractions while the officers investigate. A few minutes later, an officer arrived, and I crossed the street to meet him and gave him a description of the events. I pointed out which of the trucks the man had tossed the bags. The officer found the bags. He proceeded to take photos and put on gloves and told me to stay back. The bags were tied in a knot at the top, and it took him a minute to untie one because the gloves and how tight the knot was. But eventually he got it open. He looked inside for a few seconds and then twisted the bag closed and took a few steps back.
Shit.
What?
It's a body.
I felt sick. I could tell he felt sick. I saw him grow pale. His hand was trembling when he held the radio. Even his voice was shaking as he gave the code to dispatch. The dispatcher sounded confused when she asked him to repeat it. Within 20 minutes, the county sheriff was on the scene. Even he looked sick at the contents of the bag. The coroner arrived about 10 minutes after that, and the first officer walked me back to the house along with another one who arrived at the same time. Though I showed the first cop via the app on my phone when I described the events initially, I now showed them the video on a larger screen. My camera caught footage of the truck as it drove by both times, as well as pulling into the parking lot, though unfortunately, not a clear view of the license plate or of the man tossing the bags. We watched the footage over and over again, pausing frames, the officer taking notes. Ultimately, they requested this footage as well as a copy of the files from the past week to see if the truck had been in the area before. I've also been saving footage until the road department installs their own camera this week. Because this is still fresh, I don't know many more details. I know the body was in pieces, but I don't know the age of the victim, the gender, the cause of death, or any of that, really. Information hasn't been released to the public. I don't know if the coroner has been able to identify the body yet. A police cruiser has been parked at the fire department next door for constant surveillance in case the guy comes back. The guy who dumped the body was likely a local. How else would he know he could dump there? When I think about how this guy lives in my community, it makes me physically ill. To think that he had clearly scouted the area for a dump site, that it may not have been the first time that this happened, that this could happen again. If I hadn't called it in, If I hadn't been in the backyard at that exact moment, or if I had ignored that gut feeling, the victim would have never been found, may never find potential justice. Their loved ones may never have closure. In fact, there's a possibility that it just might happen again to another poor soul. I hope it's not me. I'm starting to think it's time I moved again. Third time's a charm, right?